Hey lovelies, Lisa here with finally a quick unboxing and review of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck that is brand spanking new coming out of US Games. And what's new about this deck, it's being printed in Italy. It seems in the past 5-10 years these decks have been printed in Italy and in China. I've been very impressed by the Chinese quality of the cardstock, the Chinese cardstock. Less impressed by the Italian versions of the deck. But this one is brand new, coming out of Italy. What is special about it is that the US Games folks have gone back to using the original hand-drawn titles from Pamela Coleman Smith, the artist behind this deck. Now, one thing just to kind of clarify what I'm talking about. So this is a probably 1973 or 74 version of what's often called the blue box deck. And I have a video where I talk about a whole bunch of these vintage decks, and it goes into detail. And it includes a deck that I've since sold, much to my chagrin, as I'm realizing. A just pristine 73 yellow box deck. This is often referred to as the yellow box, the US Games deck. But the blue box, which was printed up through the 70s, I think, by the Rider and Company Publishing. You know, this is called the Rider-Waite Tarot deck because when Arthur Edward Waite developed the deck, had Pamela Coleman Smith work as his illustrator, it was published by Rider and Sons Publishing Company in London. This version of the deck is often considered kind of a gold standard modern version of it. The cardstock is nice and thick. The color is somewhat muted. You especially see that in the blues, which range from this very delicate, I don't even know, baby blue that we see in, say, the High Priestess and the Fool and the Major Arcana in the background, to a sort of more dusky blue in the Hermit, to a brighter blue in cards like the Star, or the Two of Swords. But in the blues especially, you see this softness and subtlety. Color is really spectacular. And the quality, the clarity of the image, which you can see in the shadings, see where the gray in the shading of the Magician's Cloak, or in the waterfall quality of the High Priestess's robe, that shading is pretty subtle. In this early version of the deck, in the 70s, and up through, I think, probably the 90s, US Games followed Rider and Company by using Pamela Coleman's original calligraphy, her original titles, hand-drawn titles, and that you see that in the titles for the Major Arcana and then in the court cards. In about the 90s, I think, I don't have a precise date, but in about the 90s, you get a shift. Now this is a sealed deck. It was printed by, in Switzerland, by A.G. Mueller. This is a sealed deck. Oh no, it says made in Belgium. Maybe the box was printed in Switzerland. Okay. So Carta Mundi, the European printing company, card making company, was printing the decks then. But already we've moved away from the hand-drawn titles to this Roman, Times Roman font. And that move is motivated for good reasons. It's motivated to make the deck more susceptible to international printing, so that when you have it in Spanish or in French, the font doesn't change. Now, that was a choice that US Games made, and it meant playing around with Pamela Coleman Smith's original design, because the calligraphy was part of the original design. So, what's remarkable about this brand spanking new deck is that US Games has gone back to the hand-lettered titles. And why this is important is because I think for many of us, we're in the search for, in the market for, an inexpensive, readily available version of this canonical tarot deck, this like the modern tarot, the Waite Smith deck. We want to be able to get our hands on this deck in an easy way. So I was thinking about this morning, and I thought, you know, it's just like buying a diamond. You know, they talk with diamond about the 4 C's of diamond quality. So you have the cut of the diamond, you have the clarity. Oh, sorry, I think the second C is color. the color of the diamond. Is it white? Is it, is it yellow? You have clarity. So is it cloudy? Is it clear? And then you have carat, how many carats it is. So cut, how is it shaped? Color, how bright is it in terms of yellow or white? Clarity, how cloudy or clear it is. And then how big is it? Carat. I think we have 4 C's of tarot cards. And I just, I was thinking about this, and I'm like, in my book, Mindful Tarot, I also talk about different 4 C's. So I don't know, maybe I have something about 4 C's, maybe the letter C, maybe the number 4. My soul card actually is the Emperor, so 4s sometimes seem to like glom onto me, like I am the number 4 Velcro here. But anyway, the 4 C's of tarot, what are they? So number 1, cardstock. Is it thick? Is it matte? Is it shiny? Cardstock seems super important. But equally important seems to me color. When we're talking about the Waite Smith deck, what are the colors like? Is it super saturated? Is it more subtle and muted? The later versions of the deck, I'll show you here. Okay, so this is a very recent version of the deck. This is printed in Italy. US Games, the cardstock that comes out of their printing in China seems to me better than the cardstock that comes out of their printing in Italy, but the cardstock here is okay. It's slightly glossy. It's got a nice thickness to it, nice feel to it. It's somewhat shiny. It's a little shinier than I like, and it feels a little bit cheaper than I like. But look at the color. Look how saturated the yellows are, how saturated the blues are. Compare that to this is a 1970s yellow box, very similar to the blue box deck. In fact, indistinguishable. So contrast this 2017-ish, 18-ish version of the deck to this one. Look how much brighter the color is. So this is maybe a matter of taste, but the kind of more traditional, more vintage, more canonical Waite Smith has the subtler colors, especially relevant in the blues. So look at the High Priestess here. And in the High Priestess, this is again sort of 2017, 18 maybe more, yeah, I think 18 maybe. In the High Priestess, you can see both the color saturation is more intense, which makes the blue a little bit, in my eye, it feels cheaper. It feels less profound. Does that make sense? But again, this might be a little bit of a matter of choice and taste. Although then when I look at the skin tones, the sort of much more orangey skin tones, I also think are just seem a little bit, it makes it more cartoony to me, less naturalistic, less soft. And this version of the High Priestess also shows, so we have cardstock and color, it also shows this thing about clarity, the 3rd C. So notice how the detailing gets less subtle, which means that the contrast, as you make the colors more saturated, the contrast amps up. And so things are a little bit less clear by being more color blocky in the contrast. So that's particularly, where might that be? So, for instance, see how in this card there's, in the older 1973 version, because it's less color saturated, you've got a little bit more depth, a little bit more expressiveness in the figures of Adam and Eve, in the cloak of the angel, in the wings of the angel. So the less color saturation, slightly less contrast, brings more clarity to the image. So cardstock color, clarity. And then the 4th C, I would say, in all of this, I had a 4th C. What is it? Oh, calligraphy, of course, right? The 4th C is calligraphy. So the difference between the original titles and the typographic, mechanically produced font in the decks from the 1990s up through the present. So I am thinking that when we talk about finding this version of the Waite Smith deck, the canonical deck the most iconic version of this collaboration, this really momentous collaboration between Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Edward Waite in creating the modern tarot. When we talk about that, we really want to make sure that we're happy with all 4 C's, with cardstock, with color, with clarity, and with calligraphy. And is there a modern, widely available deck that brings it to us? Okay, so I'm showed here the blue box, and then this early version, 1973-ish version of the US Games. We could add a 5th C to this and talk about whether we have copyright or not. A version of this deck that's almost as good as the 1973 deck is a 1980s deck. So the 1980s deck, and in my video that I posted below, the link to, sorry, I'm looking for this deck. Well, here's a version. In the 1980s version of the deck, the cardstock is not quite as thick. So this is the 1970s. This is the 1980s. You can see, I think even here, if I can get it, you can see that the cardstock is thicker. Definitely the decks themselves show that story, if I can get it right. So this is the 1970s, this is 1980s. This has a copyright on it, but it's pretty small. It just says copyright US Games. More modern decks have copyright that says US Games Systems Incorporate Inc. So it's a longer copyright. Color is really similar. Maybe it's a bit more saturated in the 1980s than in the 1970s, 1980s. Calligraphy is there. So 1980s deck is pretty darn good with cardstock and color, perfect with calligraphy, has a copyright, that 5th C, I suppose, and clarity is almost identical. So it gets a little bit more saturated, so you lose a little bit, maybe a little bit of the detailing that makes the images more subtle. But like in the High Priestess, it's pretty hard to tell. You can see how the higher contrast kind of makes that waterfall effect less subtle, less effective, less clear. What about other publishers' versions of this canonical deck? So there's the A.G. Mueller. This is a German version of what is called the Premium Tarot von A.E. Waite. And as opposed to the really recognizable blue box and then US Games plaid background, this A.G. Mueller version of the deck, which is widely available now and inexpensive, goes back to the original, a version of the original Crackleback backings. So these are the backings that appeared on the 1920s and 30s copies of the deck. Cardstock is very similar to a 1970s cardstock, a little bit glossier, but nice and hefty, smooth to the touch. It's very nice cardstock. Color is not as nice, in my eyes, at least. Color is brighter, more yellow, less warm, colder, less warm tones. But look at the detail, the clarity of the image. So the A.E. von Waite, or the von A.E. Waite, sorry, the A.G. Mueller orange box, Crackleback, really does well with clarity, does well with cardstock. Color, not so much. And calligraphy, no. It uses mechanical font. This is the German one, but if you get the English one, which wasn't available when I bought this, I couldn't get a copy of it. Now it's pretty easy to get, even in the States. Nope. And of course, it doesn't have the copyright. So that 5th C, copyright, doesn't have that. So that's a plus. But it doesn't have calligraphy. So in a video, I'll also put the link to this below, in a video where I ask, is this Tarot von A.E. Waite, the premium edition from A.G. Mueller, is this the most beautiful version of the Waite Smith ever? I was like, oh, it's pretty damn good. But as I think about it, as I look through all of my vintage decks, I realize that the color maybe trumps all here. Clarity is amazing. Color, just seems a little bit more garish. Again, this is a matter of opinion, perhaps. Okay, so as we stand before today, I would have said your best bet is either buying the premium or going on eBay and buying, you can get still for about 30 bucks, a pretty good version of a 1980s deck that has the calligraphy, that has great color, has really good cardstock, not as good as the 1970s, but really good. It does have the copyright. It's pretty darn, very clear. I would have said this or this. But in terms of the 4 C's, this really hits it. So I'd say go on eBay, get yourself a vintage 80s. Now, the question is, what about this? What about this? And I am almost out of time because I have to get to work. So let's do this quickly. This is going to be quick, folks. This is going to be like my first hit. What do I think? What do I think? And then I'll play with the deck and I'll do an update. Ugh. I'll do an update if I need to after I've worked with it. I'm hoping. I am hoping. Oh, my Lord. No, that's okay. At first I looked at it, I was like, wait, that's not the calligraphy, but it is. Okay, because I bought one of these off of eBay. Not eBay, sorry, Amazon. And the picture on the Amazon seller's page had this with the banner about the new backs, the new lettering. But then the deck that came was not that. Okay, womp womp. We got the same issues around a slightly more glossy cardstock than I like and super saturated colors. Yeah. I mean, definitely better to have the titles, but this is essentially the same deck that they've been producing for a few years now. And the other thing I'll say is, like, if you look at the difference between the backs here and the backs in the 1970s or the 1980s, one of the things that you see here is that the backs are printed on each card and identical, as opposed to like printing backing on a sheet of cards and then cutting the cards out. And why that difference, you can see that difference in how the pattern is repeated here. Why that difference matters is it just gives a kind of, I don't know, it just, to my mind, it moves us away from the artisanal feel of, and the sort of the charm of these handwritten cards, these hand-drawn cards. Yeah, so, okay, we have, now I've got, I've got cards everywhere. Yeah, so, you know, pretty good. I would say we've got calligraphy. The cardstock's okay. The color I don't like. We still, of course, have the copyright, but now the copyright has gone back to the smaller copyright, US Games. US Games Systems. So it's small. It doesn't say ink, so it's slightly smaller. No, does it say? Wait, hold on. 1971 US Games. It's very small. So it's not the whole smorgasbord of, yeah, this says US Games Systems Inc. And now it's gone back to a slightly smaller imprint. So there have been some improvements. Let's look at, but then you look at the blues, and the blues just really kill me. You know, they just sort of flatten out the detail when you have it so saturated. You know, the difference between this card and, hold on. The difference between this and this, it just gets kind of washed out to my mind with that really dark blue. But, you know, maybe individual results may vary. Maybe you guys like the darker blue. Cardstock is okay. So I don't think we have an obvious solution to the woes of finding the perfect tarot deck. We're getting closer. I would probably still go, hard to say. No, I think if I only had 18 bucks and I needed to get something quickly, I would probably go with the US Games. But I think my recommendation still would be to get a 1980s version of the deck from eBay, a vintage version of the deck that's pretty clear and pretty clean. I give in my video below on various vintage editions, I give information about how to find those 1980s decks, which now by giving that information, it's getting harder and harder perhaps, but at least you can give it a shot. So, yeah, we haven't quite made it. Not perfect, but we're getting there. Maybe we're getting there. I wish they would just back off the color saturation just a bit. And I wish they would go slightly more matte with the paper that they're using, with the finish that they're using. And I wish that, yeah, I think that would fix the sort of optical effect that you get when they do the backs the way they do, that sort of like wah, 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 wah. I think if they got a little bit more matte, a little thicker with the cardstock, we'd do better. So now it strikes me that with coronavirus and what that's doing to global markets and anything coming out of China, it may be getting harder and harder for tarot folk to use China and their wonderful printing technologies to produce decks. So that may affect all of us. I mean, obviously, pandemic affects all of us, but in this very silly and superficial way, that may make it harder for us to get the kind of cardstock that we love. Okay, this is a bit of a ramble because I'm trying to cram a lot in before I head off to work, but I wanted to do this when there was good light and I could show you things. And now I have perhaps done so. Hopefully this was helpful. All right. Thank you for your practice. Thanks for sharing your time with me. Take care.